The last thing the barmaid said when you left the tavern rings in your head now. Don't go near the shore once the sun goes down. Be inside or be no more. You laughed when she said it. Hell, you both said some outlandish crap while you pretended not to be interested in each other. But the look in those pretty green eyes was not one of flirtation when she whispered the phrase, don't go near the shore once the sun goes down. Be inside or be no more. No, you recognized that gaze as one that had seen horror up close and personal. Still, you and your merry band of idiots ventured out. A job's a job, and the job was to figure out what had taken the noble's lovely wife and children. Your initial thought was the stuffy bastard did it himself. Your recon at the tavern told you otherwise. Word was he was a noble. Rare, but occasionally a reality. The other fact was they were last seen watching the sunset as the tide rolled in. That pretty much ruled out the stay away from the shore nonsense. You decided that this trip required a nice sunset by the shore campfire. It was beautiful. The cool air. Oh, it felt good on your weary face as you discussed your theories on the noble's family's disappearance as you all searched the shore. The mist rolled in as if to dare you to continue. On the horizon you saw a figure. It looked like a man on horseback at first. Upon further inspection, it didn't seem right, like it was some thing's poor attempt at a man on a horse. You rub your eyes and take a deep breath. The air doesn't taste right, and the man's head seems way too large as it rocks back and forth like a clock's pendulum, as if it might just roll off the shoulders at any given moment. As it began to gallop towards you, the barmaid's voice sounded off one more time. Don't go near the shore once the sun goes down. Be inside or be no more. The Nuckelavee is one of the most feared in Scottish folklore, referred to as the devil of the sea, not to be confused with Sahuagin sea devils. That's a completely different species in video. Now, to understand these fae and the folklore better, we need to understand the region it inhabited, the Orkney Islands. There are about 70 islands north of the Scottish mainland. They had been inhabited by the Romans, the Celts, the Vikings. The Norse colonized it around the 7th century. But there are sites on the island that are said to predate even the Egyptian pyramids, putting them back to Neolithic times. The Orkney Islands were the orcades of ancient classical literature. There remain shit tons of evidence of prehistoric occupation at various periods: underground houses, circles, standing stones, and earth houses. Skara Brae, an underground village on the west coast of the island of the mainland, is one of the most complete European relics of the late Neolithic period. This location and several others on the island collectively were designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1999. This all leads to the theory that the Nuckelavee is a combination or an amalgamation of many cultures. The Nuckelavee was so feared that even the mention of the name was quickly followed by a prayer thrice, which, 3 times. Reminds me of Beetlejuice, only the Nuckelavee are far more terrifying. If saying it once required a prayer, you sure as shit did not say that name 3 times. You might need an army of clerics covered in holy oils and maybe jello to perform a homily from the gods themselves, son. They were often the scapegoats for any shortcomings. Crops didn't grow? Freaking Nuckelavee. Got syphilis? Nuckelavee. Dog ate my homework? Hell no, it was Nuckelavee. In fact, the Nuckelavee became the go-to for most disasters that were known to afflict the hardworking folk of Orkney. If the crops were blighted by sea gust or mildew, if livestock fell over high rocks that skirts the shores, or if an epidemic raged among the men or among the lower animals, Nuckelavee was the cause of all, his breath of venom falling like a deadly disease on vegetable and animal life. Were this cacophony of catastrophic accounts not enough, the Nuckelavee was also blamed for any droughts that could ruin a harvest. From this, we are left in no doubt that the old Orcadians regarded the Nuckelavee as an incredibly powerful and dangerous creature, perhaps more powerful than the surviving accounts would indicate. How else could an earthbound entity affect the weather to such an extent? Here's an article from 1891, and we will have Grandpa Reggie read it, being he was a young lad then.
Okay, thanks. Smartass.
While many of the supernatural beings were looked upon by the people with a kind of sympathetic regard, This being was looked upon with unutterable horror, was regarded with mortal terror, and spoken of with bated breath. He was a monster of unmixed malignity, never willingly resting from doing evil to mankind. He never played a trick for the mere love of fun. Indeed, if not restrained by the mither of the sea in summer, and in winter by his terror of fresh water, he would long ago have made Orkney a manless desert. Nuckelavee was a spirit in flesh. His home was the sea, and whatever his means of transit were in that element, when he moved on land he rode a horse as terrible in aspect as himself. Some thought that rider and horse were really one, and that this was the shape of the monster. Nuckelavee's head was like a man's, only 10 times larger, and his mouth projected like that of a pig and was enormously wide. There was not a hair on the monster's body, for the very good reason that he had no skin. The whole surface of the monster appeared like raw and living flesh, from which the skin had been stripped. You could see the black blood flowing through his veins, and every movement of his muscles, when the horrid creature moved, showed white sinews in motion. What a study for an anatomist!
If crops were blighted by sea gust or mildew, if livestock fell over high rocks that skirt the shores, or if an epidemic raged among men, or among the lower animals, Nuckelavee was the cause of all. His breath was venom, falling like blight on vegetable, and with deadly disease on animal life. He was also blamed for long-continued droughts. For some unknown reason he had serious objections to fresh water, and was never known to visit the land during rain. The burning of seaweed for kelp gave terrible offence to Nuckelavee, and filled him with diabolical rage. He vented his wrath by smiting with deadly disease horses in the island of Stronay, for that was the island where kelp was first made in Orkney, and that disease spread over all the islands where kelp was made. That disease was called mortasheen. The Scottish Antiquary, 1891.
Is it just me, or did your voice change like 3 times in there, Grandpa Reggie?
That is because you are a cheap bastard and wouldn't pay for the pro version.
Fair enough. The old practice of burning gathered seaweed to make kelp for the glass and soap industries was said to cause terrible offense to Nuckelavee. The creature could not stand the smell of the pungent smoke, and it drove him into an extreme and diabolical rage. In this state, he would vent his wrath by smiting all the horses on the island of Stronsay, the island where kelp was first burned in Orkney. But now, more to the point, the folklore getting tweaked by all the different cultures that occupied the islands at one time or another, like the Kelpie, a supernatural shape-shifting water horse from Celtic folklore that is believed to haunt the rivers and lochs of Scotland and Ireland. The Kelpie sometimes appeared as a rough, hairy man who would grip and crush travelers. That kind of reminds me of the Bigfoot stuff, but that's a video for another time. But it most commonly took the form of a beautiful tame horse standing by a stream or river. In Orkney, a similar creature was called a nuggle. And in Shetland, a similar creature was called the chupatee. I'm probably pronouncing that terrible as well. It also appears in Scandinavian folklore, where it is known by the name as Bakastan. I'll spell it out. The brook horse. Kelpies are very malevolent in nature. They are known to drown their human victims and would never be seen again. This is exactly like Nuckelavee. The heart and liver are the only traces left of those the Kelpie has killed. If anyone mounted it, it would charge into the deepest part of the water, submerging and taking the rider with it. They would sometimes interbreed with human horses, and fowls were said to be fine, fleet-footed horses. The Kelpie was also said to warn of forthcoming storms by wailing and howling. Rarely, Kelpies could be benign. Now, a Grant is an English demon first mentioned by Gervase of Tilby circa 1212, and it's said to be the form of a colt which walked on its hind legs and had fiery eyes, like foals of a year old. Grant was a town spirit, and either at midday or just at sunset it would run down the middle of the street, all the dogs barking furiously, and they said it was there to be warning of imminent danger. You also have from Swiss folklore the Varastic Aligs, and it resembles a large shapeless sack, most often compared to a walking stomach. Its body is coated with eyes that produce flames, which is like the Nuckelavee, producing a distinctive and terrifying display. The creature was said to have escaped from a gateway to hell in the Luscherly Lake in Switzerland. Although no specific encounters with the Buscherler League are recorded, the creature was apparently dangerous to humans, as fishermen would avoid the areas where it was seen. Shepherds kept their flock from the beast's territory, and parents would warn their children away. Now, some will compare these to the Celtic or the kappa or the hippocampus, and the rabbit hole just gets deeper and longer the further you go. Now, the Nuckelavee are sometimes referred to as an Unseelie, and in Scottish folklore, the Seelie court and Unseelie court are two groups of the fairy folk. The Seelie is good and the Unseelie is evil. The Seelie or blessed court is made up of beings that tend to be benign and kindly towards humans. Members of the Seelie court sometimes can be seen at twilight, often in elegant courtly processions. The Seelie court may help humans in need by offering gifts of magic or food, and they will be sure to repay any kind deed. However, they are just as swift to avenge any wrongs or insults. Fairy folk who are members of the Seelie court are usually beautiful. The Unseelie or unholy court is made up of beings that are evil in nature and despise humans. They sneer at kindness and have no understanding of mercy. These beings are rarely seen, at least not by humans who live to tell a tale, and there is no way for a human to appease them. But there are many ways to anger them, so avoidance is the safest defense. Members of the Unseelie court are usually ugly and sometimes outright hideous, just like our Nuckelavee. Now, only two things kept this evil fae at bay, one being fresh water, so I guess a good water gun or even a Poland Spring or Evian bottle could rock the Nuckelavee's world, or you would have to count on the mither of the sea. Mither being the Orcadian pronunciation of mother, and I just learned a new way to say your mither. The sea mither was said to grant life to every living thing, bringing warmth to the oceans and calming the storms. Yet, to every yin there must be a yang, and the mither of the sea had a very powerful rival in Turan, the spirit of winter. Turan's screaming voice was heard in the fury of the winter gales and the waves that crashed upon the Orkney Islands. So when Turan was screaming through the brutal winter months, the Nuckelavee would haunt the shores. This leads us quite lovely to the tabletop gaming section of this presentation, because once we start discussing fae and fairy folk, we have to get into the Feywild of Dungeons & Dragons and the first world of Pathfinder. Calalon Tamari on why he moved from the lake in Cotharan to the Five Kings Mountains. As I stared at the lake in the moonlight, I saw a crab emerge from the dark water and scuttle onto the shore. Then another, then two more, then many more, until they swarmed all about me. Scuttling in a frantic herd, behind them out of the lake rode a man on a horse, both of them cloaked in clinging seaweed. The animal trotted onto the rocks, dripping water and snorting with hot breath. A sudden stench of rotten blood brought vomit to my throat. Then I saw that it wasn't a man. It wasn't a horse. And what dripped from its body was not water. When sheltered citizens of Galaran hear the word fae, they often think of little nymphs lounging in groups or pixies flitting through meadows. Wiser heads know the first world has spawned its share of grotesque. Perhaps none more gruesome than the dreaded Nuckelavee. Nicknamed the Devil of the Sea, the repulsive monster looks like the offspring of a union between two incompatible creatures. It resembles a powerful horse with a humanoid torso growing out of its back, and the legs that have fins and webbed hooves. But that's not where any likeness to a natural creature ends. The abomination has no skin, as if it had been turned inside out. Its gory, glistening body is a lattice of yellow veins pulsating with black blood, thick white muscles and sinew, and strange quivering organs. If that wasn't disturbing enough, the torso of some Nuckelavees are grotesquely deformed, with disproportionately large heads that their necks can barely support, and long, spindly arms with oversized hands that hang almost to the ground. Thankfully, most of the time, the Nuckelavee dwells unseen in brackish waters around Galarian. The creature does not protect the seas, rivers, lakes, streams, and swamps so much as it punishes those who contaminate them, emerging to haunt and kill the perpetrators when it gallops onto land dripping with water and gore, breathing putrid clouds of plague. From its rotting mouth, the pungent smell of its viscera blends with the briny tang to turn the stomach of the hardiest warrior. However, a Nuckelavee identifies the guilty, and when the cause is natural, its wrath can be indiscriminate. Its judgment is absolute, and it does not rest until it has dispensed violent justice, cutting a bloody swath of destruction across the countryside. Farmers, ranchers, and other villagers blame the terrifying monster for all manner of ills: drought, famine, plague, blight crops, dead livestock, and more. They claim that its appearance heralds doom, that it spreads ill fortune, and that horrors grow wherever its black blood soaks into the ground. Aspects of nature. Nuckelavees exist for one purpose: to punish those who despoil the natural waterways of Galarian. The grotesque creatures dwell below the surface in murky bogs, still lakes, churning rivers, and coastal currents until they ride forth to bring brutal retribution to offenders on land. Their underwater lairs are usually found near breaches to the First World, suggesting that they seek to stop corruption of the material plane before it can flow into the pristine realm of the Fae. Just as the physical form of the Nuckelavee is an unsettling hybrid of horse and humanoid, the creature embodies the strange duality of purity and contamination. Like a raging spirit of vengeance, it tenaciously pursues those who pollute the lakes, rivers, and seas of the world. But it does so by spreading a disease that sickens living creatures and withering plants. It may be that such punishment is only fitting for purveyors of filth, or perhaps the inherent conflict between opposing corruption and revealing it explains why Nuckelavee are so ferocious and hideous. Driven as they are by anger, bloodlust, and ugliness, the greater the desecration that compels the Fae horror to vengeance, the more disturbing a visage it presents. Ecology. As unnatural creatures, Nuckelavees do not mate and reproduce biologically. They simply appear near breaches in the First World and claim the surrounding regions as their territory. Scholars of the Fae theorize that the eldest send the Nuckelavees to the material plane to prevent unwanted contamination from flowing through the breaches and tainting their fertile homes. This theory also explains the Nuckelavee's freakish appearance. Many creatures of the First World are prototypes of the familiar versions on the material plane. Perhaps the Devil of the Sea is an early model of a centaur or an aquatic horse with ghastly variations. Its twisted form may also be a reflection of the impurity in which it wallows, such that one Nuckelavee's torso might be a normal humanoid, while another's hideously deformed. Most of the time, a Nuckelavee slumbers in a sea cave or a flooded hollow in its home body of water. Motionless in a bed of kelp or a maze of coral, it needs little nourishment. A few bites of aquatic plants from time to time are enough to sustain it. Some Nuckelavee are more active than others and patrol their waters, hunting catalopods and other beasts that poison the environment. Regardless, a Nuckelavee responds quickly when it senses invasive contamination. Whether the source is natural, such as an algae bloom that chokes sea life, or artificial, such as a toxic discharge from a wizard's laboratory, sewage from a city's storm drain, trash dumped from a fishing vessel, or even tainted runoff from a farmer's field. Even activities such as overfishing, building dams, or harvesting seawood to be dried and burned for its ash might incur a Nuckelavee's wrath. The Nuckelavee emerges on the shore and gallops with thunderous hooves to destroy the source of the contamination. It does not rest or return to its home waters until it kills its quarry or perishes in the attempt. During these rampages, the Fae creature's breath spreads a highly infectious disease called mortashine that wilts plants and causes living beings to sicken and die. The Nuckelavee is a hulking beast, 6 feet tall at the horse head and 9 feet tall at the humanoid head, and it weighs about 2,000 pounds. If not slain, it lives on, ageless. When the monster is fully killed, perhaps by a target it underestimated, sooner or later a replacement appears near the same breach to the first world. It's not known whether the Nuckelavee grows itself or the eldest send another guardian as a replacement. Society. Nuckelavees on the material plane rarely interact with one another. Each remains within the region near its particular breach in the first world, though the boundaries of those regions are fluid and unknowable to mortals. When a guardian leaves the water to vent its fury on a despoiler, it pursues its prey to the ends of the world, even if that means entering the domain of its kin. In case of extreme abuse of nature's waterways, multiple Nuckelavee might ride together in a terrifying pack, their howls swelling and crashing like the roar of the sea. Once a Nuckelavee's wrath is stoked, its rage grows hotter and sharper as the monster thunders towards its target, bringing plague and death to all living creatures in its path. The Fey Avenger is practically crazed with bloodlust by the time it reaches its quarry, shooting profane curses in Alco and sharing its horrific punishments with anyone within reach, whether it is the transgressor sought after or not. Sometimes it seizes the culprit in its long arms, holding the creature tightly to its gory back, and takes its prey to suffer excruciating torments in its lair, which is frequently underwater and is usually decorated with trophies cut from the bodies of past victims. That is sick. Many skeptics believe the Nuckelavee is just a story cooked up to frighten people into conserving nature's bounty and keeping Galarian's waters clean. However, anyone who has seen the Devil of the Sea or witnessed its trail of atrocities know better. These believers swear by various methods of warding off the Fey horror, wearing garlands of seaweed or kelp, filling one's pockets with horsehair soaked in brine, muttering prayers to the eldest or other entities. But these legends are just that. A few people have been chased by a Nuckelavee claimed to have escaped by leaping over a stream or creek, which the monster supposedly will not cross. This tactic was born of the mistaken belief that such an unnatural abomination would be repelled by fresh running water. Druids and priests of natural gods are said to know how to hide from a Nuckelavee or coax it back to its lair, but this tactic only works after the creature's vengeance has been carried out. Most other Fey creatures avoid Nuckelavees, perhaps fearing that the mishap monster is doing the bidding of the eldest. It also suggests that the Fey creatures don't appreciate the company of such vile and putrid monsters, or they simply have little in common with the single-minded beast other than a shared interest in conservation. Although intelligent aquatic creatures shun Nuckelavees as grotesque perversions of nature, they also show Nuckelavees great difference because the Fey protect their homes from pollution and contamination, especially vile sea and swamp denizens, such as anise hags and sea hags. See the Fey plague bearers as kindred spirits, and sometimes pair up with the creatures in mutual bouts of terror and antagonism. The treasure of a Nuckelavee. A Nuckelavee has no need of wealth or treasure in its lair beneath the waves. Typically, its only worldly possessions is the finely crafted masterwork weapon it wields against those who incur its wrath. Though some Nuckelavee eschew manufactured weapons and instead rely solely on their bite and their hooves. The possessions of the creature's victims often end up half buried in the silt of its submerged cave and in the seabed, in the lake bottom and the river bottom of the surrounding areas. Such items are stripped from offenders that the Devil of the Sea drags back to its lair, where they are drowned, eviscerated, and scattered as food for the local aquatic life. Almost any mundane item has a chance of being present. Although most objects have spent enough time in the water to rust, warp, and sustain other damage, especially shiny trinkets might have been swallowed by large fish that swam nearby or pilfered by underwater creatures drawn to such treasure. When a Nuckelavee kills a victim on land, it sometimes cuts off one of the body parts, typically a head or a hand, to display it in its lair. That's gruesome. These spoils don't last long underwater, and the Fey Guardian replaces them often. A trespasser in a cave might find a row of these recent flesh trophies impaled on spikes, wrought from coral or seashells, some still festooned with whatever helmets, necklaces, or rings they wore in life. If the rumors are true, each Nuckelavee has a separate skin that it keeps hidden and well protected near its lair. No one has ever seen such a skin, since their existence is just a theory, but They would fetch a high price from those interested in learning more about the Fae. Now, Nuckelavees on Golarion. Nuckelavees have been reported all across the inner sea region, though since many of the witnesses were in a state of utter terror, inebriated, or otherwise unreliable, much like the real world, it's possible that some of these merely spotted a rider on a horse and mistook it for the deformed Fae. The best way to find a Nuckelavee is to locate a breach to the first world and search the waters nearby, or just to spoil them in some way, in which case the creature will probably find you. Now, this is where some of the tabletop gaming lore goes way off from the actual folklore, and that would be with the token of the Nuckelavee. Nuckelavees are rarely pleased by anything other than bloody vengeance, but occasionally they take a liking to a mortal. Usually one with some connection to nature, one who has a reputation for being a friend of the waters, perhaps by virtue of cleaning a river of debris or driving a coven of polluting hags from ashore. In such instances, the Nuckelavee bestows its token upon the do-gooder. The recipient awakens one day to find a bracelet made of cold gray skin that smells of brine and constantly drips water. That sounds delightful. Some say the Nuckelavees craft these bracelets from strips of their own skin, which is why they have none left to wear. Upon donning the bracelet for the next 24 hours, the recipient gains the ability to make contaminated water clean enough to drink. As per the spell, purify food and drink, but only for water. However, the Fae token has a cost. For the same duration, the water inside the recipient's body becomes tainted, lowering his or her constitution by 2. When the token power expires, there is a chance that the devil of the sea comes after the recipient to reclaim the bracelet. Oh, that sounds just fantastic. From the few recorded descriptions of the Nuckelavee, we learned that its head was 10 times larger than a man's, with an incredibly wide mouth, often compared to the mouth of a whale, and it jutted out like a pig snout, and it had single fiery eye that burned with a red flame. Now, some descriptions have this single fiery eye being on that of the rider. Other descriptions have the single fiery eye being on that of the horse. Now, the rider, its arms reached to the ground, its body was distorted, its huge head swayed on a small neck, as if it was too weak to hold the swollen head. Hairless, its body was also skinless. Its entire surface appeared like raw and living flesh. It was said that its thick black blood could be seen coursing through yellow veins. Now, my first instinct when I read this was the Nuckelavee reminded me of the creature from the movie The Thing, which, if you haven't seen it, is basically an alien life form that comes to Earth and absorbs other life forms, taking on their appearance. Now, the Nuckelavee would not be this creature exactly, but from the various descriptions, it sounds like what maybe some being would think a horse and rider look like from their perspective, that being able to see the inner workings of the biological entity in front of it, and then mimicking it to the best of its estimation. That would, to us, give us the looks of a horse and rider as one and turned inside out. Now, the rabbit hole that this particular creature led me down is deep, and I'll admit, when I first heard the name, I immediately thought it might be a sandwich you get at a deli in Brooklyn. Yeah, I'll take the Nuckelavee on rye with some mustard. Now, somehow this turned into a 10-page script and 2 books ordered that haven't arrived yet. Thanks again to Johnny Covenant for the suggestion. Now, if you made it this far, thank you. If you enjoyed any of this presentation, please slay that like and obliterate that subscribe button. Please obliterate that subscribe button. We will continue to do our best to bring you more monster lore, cryptids, ghost stories, tabletop gaming, D&D, Pathfinder, and so much more. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't give you the only recorded account of an encounter with the Nuckelavee. The following is allegedly a true account of an encounter with the Nuckelavee recorded by the Orkney folklorist Walter Trail Dennison. I'll have someone with a Scottish accent give it, just because it sounds cooler for this particular Fae. Thank you.
Thomas, like his namesake Tam O'Shanter, was out late one night. It was moonless, a fine starlit night. Thomas's road lay close by the seashore, and as he entered a part of the road that was hemmed in on one side by the sea, and on the other by a deep freshwater loch, he saw some huge objects in front of and moving towards him. What was he to do? He was sure it was no earthly thing that was steadily coming towards him. He He could not go to either side, and to turn his back to an evil thing, he had heard, was the most dangerous position of all. So Tammy said to himself, "The Lord be about me, and take care o' me, as I am out on no evil intent this night." Tammy was always regarded as rough and foolhardy. Anyway, he determined, as the best of two evils, to face the foe, and so walked resolutely yet slowly forward. He soon discovered to his horror that the gruesome creature approaching him was no other than the dreaded Nuckelavee, the most cruel and malignant of all uncanny beings that trouble mankind. The lower part of this terrible monster, as seen by Tammy, was like a great horse, with flappers like fins about his legs, with a mouth as wide as a whale's, from which came breath like steam from a brewing kettle. He had but one eye, and that is red as fire. On him sat, or rather seemed to grow from his back, a huge man with no legs, and arms that reached nearly to the ground. His head was as big as a clue of Simmons, and this huge head kept rolling from one shoulder to the other as if it meant to tumble off. But what to Tammy appeared most horrible of all, was that the monster was skinless, this utter want of skin adding much to the terrific appearance of the creature's naked body. The whole surface of it showing only red, raw flesh, in which Tammy saw blood, black as tar, running through yellow veins, and great white sinews, thick as horse tethers, twisting, stretching, and contracting, as the monster moved. Tammy went slowly on in mortal terror, his hair on end, a cold sensation like a film of ice between his scalp and his skull, and a cold sweat bursting from every pore. But he knew it was useless to flee, and he said, if he had to die, he would rather see who killed him than die with his back to the foe. In all his terror, Tammy remembered what he had heard of Nuckelavee's dislike of fresh water, and, therefore, took that side of the road nearest to the loch. The awful moment came when the lower head of the monster got abreast of Tammy. The mouth of the monster yawned like a bottomless pit. Tammy found its hot breath like fire on his face, the long arms were stretched out to seize the unhappy man. To avoid, if possible, the monster's clutch, Tammy swerved as near as he could to the loch. In doing so, one of his feet went into the loch, splashing up some water on the foreleg of the monster, whereat the horse gave a snort like thunder and shied over to the other side of the road, and Tammy felt the wind of Nuckelavee's clutches as he narrowly escaped the monster's grip. Tammy saw his opportunity, and ran with all his might, and sore need had he to run, for Nuckelavee had turned and was galloping after him, and bellowing with a sound like the roaring of the sea. In front of Tammy lay a rivulet, through which the surplus water of the loch found its way to the sea, and Tammy knew, if he could only cross the running water, he was safe, so he strained every nerve. As he reached the near bank, another clutch was made at him by the long arms. Tammy made a desperate spring and reached the other side, leaving his bonnet in the monster's clutches. Nuckelavee gave a wild unearthly yell of disappointed rage as Tammy fell senseless on the safe side of the water. He was fooked. How's that for a reading of a story, you cheap bastard?
An encounter with a Nuckelavee should be frightening for any group of player characters, regardless of their level, simply because of the skinless creature's disturbing appearance. It is revolting in every way, especially if its torso is distorted. Thanks to the rumors that spread throughout the lands where Nuckelavee have been spotted, they have a reputation as relentless butchers that do not rest until their targets have been torn to shreds. Many villagers share the opinion that if you're marked by a Nuckelavee, you'd do better to take your own life rather than risk facing its torments. They speak of its mighty hooves pounding like cracks of thunder, its fang-filled mouth spews clouds of pestilence, its blood and gore stinking like briny death. Sounds like Bill Gates. Scholars agree that a Nuckelavee comes after those who harm the natural waters in its territory. However, no one knows why it hunts a particular transgressor, but might ignore another person who shared in the corruption. How long it takes the creature to rouse from slumber and seek vengeance, or even what constitutes an offense in its eyes, that mystery adds to the general fear of the devil of the sea. In low-level games, the player characters shouldn't face a Nuckelavee in battle on their own. Instead, they might overhear town gossip about the famed monster, come across the wreckage and slaughter that marks its passing, or see it gallop by as it chases a fleeing victim. Perhaps they could be part of a large crew hired to protect a local lord or merchant who fears retribution from his sins against the water. Villagers might ask an adventurer, who is a druid or a priest, to use her mystic nature powers to keep them safe from the creature's rampages. Regardless, you should build up an eerie atmosphere around the Nuckelavee so the PCs come to regard it as a dire, murderous force of nature. Their dread and anticipation will make their eventual direct encounter with the beast even more dramatic and memorable. Obviously, introducing a Nuckelavee into your game allows you to have the characters confront environmental aspects of the campaign world. For example, perhaps the PCs must stop a Nuckelavee attacks on a town by facing down an alchemist who is heedlessly contaminating a bog with waste from his laboratory. But the devil of the sea can be the center of many other plot hooks. Maybe the heroes have been tasked with draining a swamp or a pond to recover a buried relic, and their actions awaken a Nuckelavee that nobody knew about. Perhaps the cowed residents of a village try to appease Nuckelavee with offerings of goods, animals, or people. Maybe the characters use the Nuckelavee for their own goals by baiting an enemy into spoiling waters near a Nuckelavee's lair, ensuring that the grisly avenger goes after the foe. In your campaign, you can also explore the weird, fleshless nature of the monster. A shaman's claim that the Nuckelavees are full of rage because their skins were stolen by the gods could be the seed to send a party on a quest to find one of the creature's lost skins, if such a thing even exists. Alternatively, perhaps each Nuckelavee safeguards its own skin, which is hidden somewhere near its lair, and anyone who finds it can gain power over the foul creature. Another variation to use in tabletop gaming of the Nuckelavee is the Callous Devil. Growing from the back of a horse-like beast is the torso of a sea hag. With grossly elongated arms and legs, clawed hands, its tangled web of stringy hair does not hide the disturbing fact that the hideous creature has no skin and is built of gore and viscera. This Nuckelavee is even more hideous than the usual because its torso is that of a sea hag, whose skinless head somehow retains a mess of hair-like knotted seaweed that flails behind it as the creature gallops furiously over the land. The creature dwells in the Callous Lake at the southern tip of the River Kingdoms and terrorizes the nearby town of Rivington, where humans and half-elves survive by fishing and guiding travelers along the branches of the Selin. That would be the Selin rivers. Its mighty hooves also pound along the riverbank as far west as Timon and as far east as the Creeper would, bringing plague and death to those who despoil the waters. The influence of its hag torso drives the beast to want to clothe itself in skin. Other Nuckelavees keep trophies of their kills, but the Callous Devil flays its quarry to create a patchwork cloak of flesh that it drapes over its upper body. The husk of skin tears easily, so the devil requires a steady supply of victims to maintain its appearance. Some villagers that suffer under its vengeance try to appease it by stalking out criminals and other undesirables for its pleasure. The Fey Terror takes these sacrifices but shows no favor to its supplicants. And now the Callous Lake. The Callous Devil lives in a particularly flooded cave below the lake bed, accessible through a sinkhole that lies several hundred yards from the northern shore. The hole, hidden in an area thick with silt and seaweed, gives way to a shaft that plunges below the lake at a slight angle, then turns sharply, becoming a horizontal tunnel that opens into the cavern. The lair is cold and dark. Luminescent algae on the walls gives off a green glow that faintly illuminates part of the hollow. Because the cave is open to the Callous Lake, where the branches of the Selin River converge, fish, snakes, eels, and other natural aquatic creatures sometimes make their way into the half-flooded lair. The Callous Devil sleeps in the submerged portion of the cave and stores its skin cloak, gross, plus any raw materials such as half-flayed victims and whatever possessions they might have had, on a rocky plateau above the waterline. Whew! Many captives drown during a descent into the lair, but some survive the trip and are conscious when flayed. Large gray oozes that cling to the cave walls and roof digest the remains of its prey after it harvests their skin with its claws. That is gross. Now, if you made it this far, for sure you have liked and subbed, and we thank you for your jump upon this journey with us through the folklore of the Orkney Islands that involve the dreaded Nuckelavee, a quick romp through the Unseelie and Unseelie courts of the Fae, a trek through some of the lore of this cryptid in Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder, especially our look into its rich lore on Galarian and the First World. Remember, their weakness is fresh water. It's what saved Tomas. They don't even come out in the rain, so that weakness is mighty. So if you wish to enjoy a stroll by the rocky shores of the Orkney Islands, remember to pack a good water gun or only trek when the Mither of the Sea is in charge. Thank you very much.